Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to our buddy read of Mr. Scarborough's Family by Anthony Trollope. Uh, this is his last major novel, and it's the story of the eponymous Mr. Scarborough, who has decided that the only approach that he feels like taking to the mounting debts of his eldest son, Monte, is to declare him to the world to be illegitimate and produce the papers to prove it. A secret that apparently he was going to take to his grave if it hadn't been for Montjoy's own gambling, which puts the whole of the estate of Tretton Park in danger. And since that announcement, we have seen Captain Scarborough disinherited. We've seen him defeated by Harry Ainsley in combat late at night, drunkenly. And we've also seen him disappeared. He has disappeared from the world. No one knows where he is, even his own father. And it's only just recently that we learned that his brother, Augustus Scarborough, knows where he is, that Montjoy went to Augustus as soon as he picked himself up off the pavement that night, and has been hidden from the world by Augustus Scarborough ever since. But we don't know anything more about him, and we're curious, and Trollope knows we are. So now we come to chapter 11, in which we learn all about him, in which we decamp from London, or from Cheltenham, or from Tretton Park, and follow the captain. So let's see. This is a chapter called Monte Carlo. Towards the end of September, while the weather was so hot as to keep away from the south of France all but the very determined travelers, an English gentleman, not very beautiful in his outward appearance, was sauntering about the great hall of the gambling house at Monte Carlo in the kingdom or principality of Monaco, the only gambling house now left in Europe in which idle men of a speculative nature may yet solace their hours with some excitement. The great gambling hall in Monte Carlo. Nor is the amusement denied to idle ladies, as might be seen by 2 or 3 highly dressed habitués, who at this moment were depositing their shawls and parasols with the porters. The clock was on the stroke of 11 when the gambling room would be opened, and the amusement was too rich in its nature to allow of the loss of even a few minutes. But this gentleman was not an habitué, nor was he known even by name to any of the small crowd that was then assembled. But it was known to many of them that he had had a great turn of luck on the preceding day, and had walked off from the Rouge et Noir table with 400 or 500 pounds. I don't know who this guy is, but I think we do. I think we know who this is. The weather was still so hot that but few Englishmen were there, and the play had not yet begun to run high. Trollope keeps making mention of the heat of southern France. Really has to be felt to be believed. There are only 2 or 3 men who cannot keep their hands from ruin when ruin is open to them. To them, heat and cold, the dog star or 20 degrees below zero, make no difference while the croupier is there with his roulette before him, capable of turning up the card. They know that the chance is against them, 1 in 20, let us say, and that in the long run 1 in 20 is as good as 2 to 1 to effect their ruin. For a day may stand against 1 in 20, as this man has done, but for 2 or 3 days or a week they may possibly do so, but they know that the doom must come at last, as it does come invariably, and they go on. Gamblers don't seem to get this, but Trollope understands it. I think from bitter personal experience, he understands it. Not his own personal experience, but our friend, the Englishman, who had won the money, was not such a one as these, at any rate in regard to Monaco. Yesterday had been his first appearance, and he had broken ground there with great success. He was an ill-looking person, poorly clad, what in common parlance we call seedy. He had not a scrap of beard on his face, and though swarthy and dark as to his countenance, was light as to his hair, which hung in quantities down his back. He was dressed from head to foot in a suit of cross-barred, light-colored tweed, of which he wore the coat buttoned tight over his chest as though to hide some deficiency of linen. The gentleman was altogether disreputable-looking personages, and they who had seen him with his money, or win his money, Frenchmen and Italians for the most part, had declared among themselves that his luck had been most miraculous. It was observed that he had a companion with him, who stuck close to his elbow, and it was asserted that this companion continually urged him to leave the room. But as long as the croupier remained at the table, he remained, and continued to play through the day with almost invariable luck. It was surmised among the gamblers that had he not entered the room with above 20 or 30 pieces in his pocket, and that he had taken away with him when the place was closed 600 Napoleons. Look there, he was come again to give it all back to Madame Blanc with interest, said the Frenchman to the Italian, because they know that a high winner on one day is going to come back. They're not going to just pocket their winnings and leave. Yes, and he will end by blowing his brains out within a week. He is just the man to do it. These Englishmen always rush at their fate like mad bulls, said the Frenchman. They get less distraction for their money than anyone. He who goes slowly goes safely, said the Italian, jingling the 4 Napoleons in his pocket, which had been 6 on yesterday morning. Then they sauntered up to the Englishman, and both of them touched their hats to him. The Englishman just acknowledged the compliment and walked off with his companion, who was still whispering something into his ear. It is a gendarme who is with him, I think, said the Frenchman. Only the man does not walk erect. And okay, so we can guess who this person is, and instead of hurrying on to identify him or hurrying on with the story, Trollope gives us a little reminder that he is a working author and that the purpose of this chapter, the chapter called Monte Carlo, has nothing to do with Monte Carlo. The purpose of this chapter is to acquaint us with the current goings-on with Captain Scarborough, which can be done in 10 lines. But that won't fill out a chapter for a serialized piece of fiction. So, let's hear what Trollope has to say about Monte Carlo. At length. Who does not know the outside hall of the magnificent gambling house at Monte Carlo, with all the golden splendor of its music room within? Who does not know the lofty roof and lounging seats, with all its luxuries of liveried servants, its wealth of newspapers, and every appendage of costly comfort which can be added to it, and its music within? Who does not know that there are to be heard sounds on a greater perfection of orchestral melody than are to be procured by money and trouble combined in the great capitals of Europe? Think of the trouble endured by those unhappy fathers of families who indulge their wives and daughters at the Philharmonic or St. James's Hall. Think of the horrors of our theaters, with their hot gas and narrow passages, the difficulties of entrance and almost impossibility of escape. And for all this money has to be paid high prices, and the day has to be fixed long beforehand, so that the tickets may be secured, and the daily feast, Papa's too often solitary enjoyment, has to be turned into a painful early fast. And when at last the thing has been done, and the torture endured, the sounds heard have not always been good of their kind, for the money has not sufficed to purchase an air of a crowd of the best musicians. But at Monte Carlo you walk in with your wife in her morning costume, and seating yourself luxuriously in one of those soft stalls which are there prepared for you, you give yourself up for the perfect ease of absolute enjoyment. For 2 hours the concert lasts, and all around is perfection and gilding. There is nothing to annoy the most fastidious taste. You have not heated yourself with fighting your way up a crowded stairs. No box-keeper has asked you for a shilling. No link boy has dunned you because he has stood useless for a moment at the door of your carriage. No panic has seized you and still oppresses you because of the narrow dimensions in which you have to seat yourself for the next 3 hours. There are no 20 minutes during which you are doomed to sit in miserable expectation. Exactly at the hour named the music begins, and for 2 hours it is your own fault if you be not happy. A railway carriage has brought you to the steps leading up to the garden in which the princely halls are built, and when the music is over again will take you home. Nothing can be more perfect than the concert room at Monte Carlo, and nothing more charming. For all this is nothing whatever to pay. It's supported by gambling, so there are lots and lots of stuff that you can enjoy in public promenades and parks and whatnot in Monte Carlo, in Monaco, that are free to guests, to visitors, to tourists. But by whom, out of whose pocket, are all these good things provided? They tell you at Monte Carlo that from time to time are to be seen men walking off in the dark of the night, or in the gloom of the evening, or for that matter in the broad light of day, if stern necessity of the hour require it, with a burden among them, to be deposited where it may not be seen or heard of any more. They are carrying away all the mortal remains of one of the gentlemen who've paid for your musical entertainment. When I was rereading this passage, I was thinking about Woo's pigs from Deadwood. If you don't know Deadwood, do yourself a favor and don't look up that reference. He has given his all for the purpose and has then, blown his brains out. It is one of the disagreeable incidents to which the otherwise extremely pleasant money-making operations of the establishment are liable. Such accidents will happen. A gambling house, the keeper of which is able to maintain the royal expense of the neighboring court out of his winnings, and also keep open for those who are not ashamed to accept it, gratis, all for love, a concert room, brilliant with gold, filled with the best performers, whom the world can furnish, and comfortable beyond all opera houses known to men, must be liable to a few such misfortunes. Who is not ashamed to accept it? I have said, having lately been there and thoroughly enjoyed myself. Now keep in mind, this is not necessarily Trollope, that I. We've gone over this in previous readings of Trollope's work. In the I of his narrator, his stories are always being told to you by somebody. But considering how many times and how many novels the I who is telling you the story reports having interactions with the characters, who are, remember, fictional, it's not a safe bet to say the I is always Trollope. In this case, probably. But I did not put myself in the way of having to cut my throat, on which account I felt, as I came out, that I had been somewhat shabby. I was ashamed in that I had not put a few Napoleons down on the table. Conscience had prevented me, and a wish to keep my money. But should not conscience have kept me away from all that happiness from which I had not paid? I had not thought of it before I went to Monte Carlo, but I am inclined now to advise others to stay away, or else put down half a Napoleon at any rate as the price of a ticket. The place is not overcrowded, because the conscience of many is keener than was mine. I too urge you to visit Monaco. We ought to be grateful that the august sovereign of Monaco, in that he enabled an enterprising individual to keep open for us so brilliant a fashion the last public gaming house in Europe. If you haven't kept count by now, this is hundreds and hundreds of words. And now we're talking about the king of Monaco. So this is Trollope padding, as we have seen him do. The principality is but large enough to contain the court of the sovereign, which is held in a little town of Monaco, and the establishment of the last legitimate gamblers, which is maintained at Monte Carlo. If the report of the world does not malign the prince, he lives as does the gambler, out of the spoil taken from the gamblers. He is to be seen in his royal carriage going forth with his royal consort, and very royal he looks. His little teacup of a kingdom, or rather a roll of French bread, as it is crusty and picturesque, is now surrounded by France. There is Nice away to the west, and Mentone to the east, and the whole kingdom lies within the compass of a walk. Mentone, in France, at any rate, is within 5 miles of the monarch's residence. How happy it is that there should be so blessed a spot left in tranquillity on earth's surface. But on the present occasion, Monte Carlo was not all in its grandeur because of the heat and the weather. Another month, and English lords and English members of Parliament and English barristers would be there. All men, for instance, who could afford to be indifferent as to their character for a month, and the place would be quite alive with music, cards, and dice. At present, men of business only flock to its halls, eagerly intent on making money, though, alas, almost all doomed to lose it. But our one friend with the long, light locks was impatient for the fray. The gambling room had now been opened, and the servants of the table, less impatient than he, were slowly arranging their money and their cards. Our friend had taken his seat, and was already resolving, with his eyes fixed on the table, where he would make his first plunge. In his right hand was a bag of gold, and under his left were hidden the 12 Napoleons with which he intended to commence. Yesterday he had gone through his day's work by 12, though on 1 or 2 occasions he had plunged deeply. It had seemed to this man as though the new heaven had been opened to him. As of late he had seen little luck in this world. The surmises made as to the low state of his funds when he entered the room had been partly true, but time had been when he was able to gamble in the most costly fashion even here, and to play among those who had taken his winnings and losings simply as a matter of course. And now the game had begun, and the 12 Napoleons were duly deposited. Again he won his stake, an omen for the day, and was exultant. A second 12 and a third was put down, and on each occasion he won. In the silly imagination of his heart, he declared to himself that the calculation of all chances was as nothing against his run of luck. Here was a spot on which it was destined that he should redeem all the injury which fortune had done him, and in truth this man had been misused by fortune. His companion whispered in his ear, but he heard not a word of it. He increased the 12 to 15, and again won. As he looked round, there was a halo of triumph which seemed to illume his face. He had chained chance to his chariot wheel, and would persevere now that the good time had come. What did he care for the creature at his elbow? He thought of all the good things which money could again purchase for him as he carefully fingered the gold of the next stake. He had been rich, though he was now poor. Though how could a man be accounted poor who had an endless sum of 600 Napoleons in his pocket, a sum which, in truth, endless, while it could be so rapidly recruited in this fashion? The next stake he also won, but as he raked all the pieces which the croupier pushed towards him, his mind had become intent on another sphere and on other persons. Let him win what he might, his old haunts were now closed to him. What good would money do him, living such a life as he must now be compelled to pass? As he thought of this, the 25 Napoleons on the table were taken away from him almost without consciousness on his part. At that moment there came a voice in his ear. Okay, so we still haven't been told who this person is, but we're about to learn, and the voice is another character added to the scene, which prompts me to warn you ahead of time again about the whole question of Trollope and anti-Semitism. A number of you have emailed me on the subject. I like Trollope. I like him as an author. I don't particularly like him as a person. I think in his biographies he comes across as a bit of a shouting bore. But I like him in his fiction so much that I want to acquit him of active anti-Semitism. I want to say instead that what he's doing with the Jewish moneylenders in this book and other books, but especially here, is just a kind of ethnic comedy, that he's playing to the stereotypes of the day. I don't know that it holds up. A number of you have pointed out that you don't think it holds up. You understand that I'm partial to him because he's given me so much reading pleasure, but what you think that what you're looking at here is anti-Semitism. Could be. Either way, the Yiddish dialect that he gives here, I'm not going to do. At that moment there came a voice in his ear, not the voice of his attending friend, but one which he accurately knew, the lisping, fiendish sound. "Ah, Captain Scarborough, I thought it was possible you might be here. This is a very nice place." Our friend looked round and glared at the man, and felt that it was impossible that his occupation should be continued under his eyes. Yes, it was likely. How do you like Monte Carlo? You have plenty of money, plenty. The man was small and oily and black-haired and beaky-nosed, with a perpetual smile on his face, unless when on special occasions he would be moved to expressions of deep anger. Of the modern Hebrews, a most complete Hebrew. But a man of purpose who never did things by halves, who could count upon good courage within, and who had never allowed himself to be foiled by misadventure. He was one who, beginning with nothing, was determined to die a rich man, and was likely to achieve his purpose. Now there was no gleam of anger on his face, but a look of invincible good humor, which was not, however, quite good humor when you came to examine it closely. "Oh, is that you here, is it, Mr. Hart?" We've met Mr. Hart before. We got the Yiddish dialect before with Mr. Hart. "Yes, it is me. I have followed you. Oh, I have quite a pleasant tour following you. But then I got my nose once on the scent, then I was sure it was Monte Carlo. And it is Monte Carlo, huh? Captain Scarborough?" Captain Scarborough has come down in the world. Clean-shaven? Seedy? Yes, of course it is Monte Carlo. That is to say, Monte Carlo is the place where we are now. I don't know what you mean by running on in that way. Then he came back from the table, Mr. Hart following close behind him, and his attendant at a further distance behind him. As he went, he remembered that he had slightly increased the 600 Napoleons of yesterday, and that the money was still in his own possession. Not all the Jews in London could touch the money while he kept it in his pocket. "Who is that man there?" said Mr. Hart. "What can that be to you?" "He seems to follow you pretty close." "Not as close as you do, by George. And perhaps he has something to get by it, which you haven't." Come. If he have more to get than I, he must be pretty deep. There is Mr. Tyrwhitt. No one have more to get than I, only Mr. Tyrwhitt. So Hart and Tyrwhitt are his foremost creditors, the people that who've given him the most money at the highest interest. He's in debt to them more than anybody. But Tyrwhitt doesn't go chasing after him. He has a lawyer to do that. "Why, Captain Scarborough, the little game you was playing there, which was a very pretty little game, is as nothing to my game with you. When you see the money down on the table there, it seems to be much, because of gold glitters, but it is nothing to my little game where the gold does not glitter because it is pen and ink. Pen and ink soon writes 10,000 pounds. But you think much of it when you win 200 pounds at roulette." "I think nothing of it," said our friend, Captain Scarborough. So here the narrator actually does confirm that this is Captain Scarborough and calls him our friend. Why? Captain Scarborough has not been characterized as particularly nice, but I think in the long line of chapters since we last saw him, we have felt a little sympathy towards him, and I think Trollope knows that. I think that was his intent. And it goes into your pockets and gives champagne to ladies instead of paying your debts to the poor fellows who've supplied you for so long with all the money. All this occurred in the gambling house at a distance from the table, but within hearing of that attendant who still followed the player. These moments were moments of misery to the captain, in spite of the banknote for 600 Napoleons, which were still in his breast coat pocket. And they were not made lighter by the fact that all the words spoken by the Jew were overheard by the man who was supposed to be there in the capacity of his servant. But the man, as it seemed, had a mission to fulfill, and was the captain's master as well as servant. "Mr. Hart," said Captain Scarborough, repressing the loudness of his words as far as his rage would admit him, but still speaking so as to attract the attention of some of those round him, "I do not know what good you propose to yourself by following me in this manner. You have my bonds, which are not even payable till my father's death." "Ah, there you are very much mistaken, and are then only payable out of the property to which I believed myself to be the heir when the money was borrowed. You are still the heir to Tretton. There is not a shadow of doubt as to that." "I hope when the time comes," said the captain, "you will be able to prove your words." "Of course we shall prove them. Why not? Your father and your brother are very clever gentlemen, I think, but they will not be more clever than Mr. Samuel Hart. Mr. Tyrwhitt also is a clever man. Perhaps he understands your father's way of doing business. Perhaps it is all right with Mr. Tyrwhitt. It shall be all right with me, too, I swear it. When will we come back to London, Captain Scarborough?" Then there came an angry dispute in the gambling room, during which Mr. Hart by no means strove to repress his voice. Captain Scarborough asserted his rights as a free agent, declaring himself capable, as far as the law was concerned, of going wherever he pleased without reference to Mr. Hart, and told that gentleman that any interference on his part would be regarded as an impertinence. "But my money, which you must pay this minute if I please to demand it. You did not lend me £25,000 without security. It is 45 now, at this moment. That's the kind of interest we're talking about. These are loan sharks. Take it. Go and put it in your pocket. You have a lot of writings. Turn them into cash at once. Take them to any other Jew in London and sell them. See if you can get your £25,000 for them, or 25,000 shillings. You certainly cannot get 25 pence for them, though you had all the police in this royal kingdom to support you. My father says that the bonds I gave you are not worth the paper on which they were written. If you are cheated, so have I been. If he has robbed you, so has he me. But I have not robbed you, and you can do nothing to me." "I will stick to you like beeswax," said Mr. Hart, while the look of good humour left his countenance for a moment. "Like beeswax. You shall not escape me again. You will have to follow me to Constantinople, then." "I will follow you to the devil." "You are likely to go there before me. But for the present I am off to Constantinople, from whence I intend to make an extended tour of Mount Caucasus and then into Tibet. I shall be very glad of your company, but I cannot offer to pay the bill. When you and your companions have settled yourselves in comfortably at Tretton, I shall be happy to come and see you there. You will have to settle the matter first with my younger brother, if I may be bold to call that well-born gentleman my brother at all. I wish you a good morning, Mr. Hart." Upon that he walked out into the hall, and thence down the steps into the garden in front of the establishment, his own attendant following him. That reference that he makes to, you and Mr. Tyrwhitt and all the other creditors, when you're living at Tretton Park, I'll come and see you, is a reference to the fact that he has borrowed so much money, both directly from Hart and Tyrwhitt and other creditors, and also in post-obits raised against the inheritance of Tretton Park, that all of it will go to his creditors. There'll still be money left over that he owes. So it's not that he's borrowed a little sum of money here. Mr. Hart also followed him, but did not immediately seek to renew the conversation. If he meant to show any sign of keeping his threat of sticking to the captain like beeswax, he must show his purpose at once. The captain for a time walked round the little enclosure in earnest conversation with the attendant, and Mr. Hart stood on the steps watching them. Play was over, at any rate for that day, as far as the captain was concerned. "Now, Captain Scarborough, don't you think you've been very rash?" said the attendant. I think I've got 650 Napoleons in my pocket instead of waiting to get them driblets from my brother. But if he knew that you had come here, he would withdraw them altogether. Of course, he will know now. That man will be sure to tell him. He will let all London know. Of course, it would be so when you came to a place such of common resort as Monte Carlo. In other words, Monte Carlo is not low profile. And now that one moneylender has found Captain Scarborough there, the whole of London is going to know that he's alive and where he is. A common resort? Do you believe he came here as a place of common resort? Do you think that he had not tracked me out and would have done so whether I'd gone to Melbourne or New York or St. Petersburg? But the wonder is that he should spend his money in such a vain pursuit. It is actually a good point. Mr. Hart is spending money on train fare and carriage fare and whatnot to follow this guy around. Captain, you do not know what is vain and what is not. It is your brother's pleasure that you should be kept in the dark for a time. Hang my brother's pleasure. Why am I to follow my brother's pleasure? Because he will allow you an income. He will keep a coat on your back and a hat on your head and supply meat and wine for your needs. Here Captain Scarborough jingled the loose Napoleons in his trouser pockets. Oh yes, that is very well, but it is not going to last forever. Indeed, it will not last for a week unless you leave Monte Carlo. I shall leave this afternoon by train for Genoa. And where should we go after then? You heard me suggest to Mr. Hart, to the devil, or else to Constantinople, and after that to Tibet. I suppose I shall still enjoy the pleasure of your company. Mr. Augustus wishes that I should remain with you, and as you yourself say, perhaps it will be best. So we don't have a name, but the attendant is a servant of Augustus Scarborough, who is apparently being paid to stick with his brother. His brother is sent out of London, incommunicado, low profile, but not without supervision. And you have to reflect at this point. If Captain Scarborough were a little more discreet, if he didn't go to Monte Carlo, for instance, or if he went to Monte Carlo and that first day won a lot and then left for some little village in the south of France and just lived quiet, the money that he's won already would allow him to live in comfort for a good long time. But no, he stays, and so he is found. So that's chapter 11. We now are caught up on Captain Scarborough. He is gambling still, but he is not gambling in London. So I will wrap this up for now, and I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.